welcome back to my channel, and today is part 6 of What Would the Elves Wear If They Were Real, where we're going to be focusing on Elvish embroidery. I mentioned in a few of the previous videos of this series that I was going to be doing an entirely separate video for the embroidery, and some of you might have wondered why that was necessary, so let me explain. So when I first started thinking about the embroidery for this series, I thought to myself, what is embroidery actually for? Like, sure, you can use it to make stuff look prettier, but there's more that you can do with it. Historically, embroidery was often used to communicate through your clothing. It could tell people who you are, where you're from, your family history, all kinds of stuff. This is a really big part of Ukrainian embroidery. So I thought, why don't I try doing something similar with Elvish embroidery? So that meant that I had to come up with an entire system for how all of this symbolism and stuff was going to work. And I don't even think you understand how complicated this ended up being. I spent 2 straight days of writing a 10-page manual on this embroidery system. Is this perhaps overkill for an amateur costuming project? Yes. Is this probably the nerdiest video I've ever done? Also yes. So the reason that this is so incredibly complicated is because it involved a whole lot of Elvish history. Tons of research on the different groups of elves, how they divided, where they lived, and all that jazz. I quickly realized that this was going to be way too much information for me to just tell you in a video, hence the reason I wrote a 10-page manual on it. If you want more detailed information on this system and how it all works, I have the manual as a Google document in the description. But in this video, I'm going to give it to you as simply as possible. Basically, throughout the history of Middle-earth, there were a bunch of different groups of elves. So generally for this system, there is a different symbol for each of these groups of elves. So here is a general guide to all of the symbols. Pick a kind of elf or a blend of kinds of elves and it's probably on here. In the manual, you'll find all of the information you need on the usage of these symbols. But basically, for the elvish garments I have right now, they don't have any embroidery on them, and I want to change that. So I need to pick a group of elves, find the corresponding symbol, and start embroidering. So I'm going to start by embroidering my dress. Generally speaking, the way that these symbols would be used is by embroidering something botanical, as would often be done by the elves, but using the symbol for one or all of the leaves. I think that's the general design idea that I'm going to go with, but of course there are a bunch of different ways that you could do it. Once again, the manual goes into all of this stuff. You could eliminate the outline of the leaf if you don't want to have anything botanical involved, or if you don't want the symbol to be super noticeable, you can embroider it on the cuffs of your sleeves. And there's also some instances where you don't even need to use it at all. Now, something I haven't talked much about in this series is that colors can indicate where an elf is from. Not definitively, but there are some colors that are much more common in particular elvish realms, especially for hunters, soldiers, and other representatives of that realm. For example, an army from Mirkwood would almost always wear green and brown, but a lot of the time just a regular citizen of an area could wear whatever colors they wanted. So for this dress's embroidery, I've decided to go with dark blue/navy blue embroidery to go with the cloak that I made a while ago. So I'm going to start sketching my embroidery design onto the dress. For planning out the embroidery, I just drew it out freehand directly onto the fabric, and I tried my best to make it symmetrical. I started with just the major outlines and added the smaller details later. I began using an embroidery hoop, but I quickly found that this was making the whole process harder instead of easier, but depending on the fabric you're working with, you might still find an embroidery hoop useful. I basically used a back stitch for all of the embroidery, but I overlapped all of the stitches a little bit, meaning when I passed the needle back through the fabric, I went down in the middle of my previous stitch. I personally think this makes the lines look a little more consistent instead of a bunch of detached stitches. Once I was done with the main outline, I started on the more detailed lines that were inside of the leaves. For this, I used 1 strand of embroidery thread rather than the 3 strands that I used for the outline. I decided to use the symbol for part Sindarin, part Sylvan elves. This type of elf is a big part of the population in Mirkwood and Lothlorien. I also decided to embroider the symbol on the cuffs of the sleeves. Next, I started on the embroidery for the Elvish blouse. When I was drawing out the design, I found it really useful to pin the blouse down to my bed. This helps keep everything flat and prevent the fabric from warping while I was drawing. Then for the actual embroidery, I used basically the same methods as before, but I used white embroidery floss. Now let's take a look at the finished products. So that is the Elvish embroidery system. Of course, this is entirely made up by me. This is not canon to anything in the Tolkien universe, but it is my headcanon, if you will. I must say I'm very pleased with the result of the embroidery on both of the garments, but particularly this one. I just love how it looks so, like, whimsical and celestial. If you want to try any of this embroidery system out for yourself, once again, there is a link in the description to the manual that I wrote. I will continue to use this system moving forward in this series because I do plan to do some attachable pockets. There's also a pair of Elvish pants that I have yet to make, not to mention stockings and all kinds of other things. I just want to talk for a second about these ears. These are prosthetic latex elf ears that I got from an Etsy shop called Madhouse Effects Studio. I will put a link to their Instagram in the description, not their Etsy shop, because they have restocks and they sell out so incredibly fast their shop is empty most of the time. But in case you were wondering where I got these elf ears, that's where. I absolutely love them. So I guess that kind of concludes this incredibly nerdy video. Real quick, I'd just like to mention that I have an Etsy shop called Gwen's Vintage Box, where I'm selling vintage and antique curated boxes themed after different colors. So the link will be in the description if you want to check that out. That would be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please comment, rate, subscribe, and all that jazz, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye! Don't mind me actually going to check to be sure that this is part 6. I don't even need to say it, because if you can hear that and you've watched my channel, you know what's happening in the kitchen right now.